When I was very young, I met this orchestra under the direction of my father. So I heard them many times in rehearsals and in performances which my father, the conductor Mikhail Yurovsky, conducted them in. This was late 80s, early 90s. And then I conducted them also a few times in my early years. I once replaced a conductor at a short notice with a very difficult program with a lot of contemporary works in it. This was back in 1995, and then the orchestra asked me to come back. I think at that time the orchestra was very good, but it was still very much East German orchestra with all the ingredients. The mentality was very, very influenced by the socialist past. But I always enjoyed listening to them. I thought they were very musical and very committed in the performance. When I met them later, they, I think, became technically more assured through the years with Maestro Janowski. But luckily they preserved a lot of their enthusiasm and openness for the music. Also, you cannot call them an East German orchestra anymore because they have many different nationalities from all countries and continents of the world playing in this orchestra. So it is an international orchestra with German roots. I think the orchestra has a very rich, typically German string sound, and also the sound of the woodwinds and brass is characteristic of that of a German orchestra. So I would say this, with this type of sound, composers like Brahms, Wagner, and Bruckner immediately comes to mind. But the general sound they have is very good for German and also Russian romantic music. Mahler is one of my earliest loves as a composer. I fell in love with Mahler's music when I was very young, 15 or 16. And maybe the reason why I've become a conductor is because I wanted to conduct Mahler symphonies. However, here we're performing not only pieces by Mahler, but also a piece arranged by Mahler, a piece by Beethoven, reorchestrated by Mahler. So Mahler becomes a very important figure, not only as a composer, but also as a conductor. I think Mahler, for me, is the key to understanding of the music of the 20th century. Technically, Mahler is a composer of the late Romanticism, but with Mahler starts the modern epoch. And so, for me, as the person of the 21st century, Mahler is seminal in understanding the period of transition from 19th to 20th century. Mahler's Symphony Number One is one of the most popular works Mahler wrote, and the one most frequently performed, because it's also one of the rare cases in Mahler's work where there are no vocal soloists, there is no chorus, there is no text. It's a purely instrumental symphony. But few listeners would know that Mahler has composed this symphony in a completely different shape. Initially, he wrote it as a 5-movement work, and we are going to play this early version, maybe not entirely, because the very first version was written for much smaller orchestra, more the orchestra of the Bruckner size. Then he added richness of orchestration to it, but this was the second thoughts, and by this time he had lost the original second movement, Blumine. So what we're doing a hybrid version. We're inserting Blumine back in, so the symphony becomes in 5 movements rather than 4, but we play it in the later orchestration, so the movement 1 and the last 3 movements are played as we know them from the other version. Nowadays, it is also possible to perform the original Mahler 1, but it's, I would say, a little bit less interesting in terms of orchestral colors. It's less perfect a work. So that's why I decided to go for this hybrid version. Beethoven's 7th Symphony is one of the most popular works ever. We are hoping to shed a new light on this symphony by interpreting it through the prism of Gustav Mahler's version. So Gustav Mahler has made orchestral retouches to the Beethoven, which was common at the time. A lot of people did that. Richard Wagner did it. Mahler's contemporary and rival conductor Felix von Weingartner did it as well. A lot of people did their versions of Beethoven. Mahler was probably the more radical of them, because he was not only a conductor but a great composer. So he approaches Beethoven as a colleague. And what Mahler does, he adds orchestration, so it's much bigger orchestration than usually. It's probably, for the Japanese audiences, more to compare with the way Beethoven was played by Berlin Philharmonic and Herbert von Karajan in the 70s and 80s, in terms of the size of the orchestra. But where Karajan was simply adding instruments following his conductorial impulses, Mahler approaches the whole thing as a composer. He doesn't add anything, so all the notes you hear are those composed by Beethoven, but the orchestration is thought through very thoroughly, and that's what I find distinct Mahler's version from all other editions of Beethoven symphonies. And I think it adds the epic scale to this music, where today we're mostly used to hearing this music performed on period instruments, very fast. Here, because of the size of the orchestra and also because of the specific bowings which Mahler prescribes, the tempo will be heavier, it will be slower, but I think it is still Beethoven that we're hearing, not Mahler. So it does not affect the core of the music. It makes the music richer, it maybe places it closer to the Romantic period, but it's still a symphony by Beethoven, and Mahler's colors make it, in my opinion, even more fascinating. Leif Ove Ansnes is an old musical partner of mine, you could say almost old friend. We've performed many times together, playing very different compositions. The last 2 appearances I had with him included Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 4 and the Fantasie by Claude Debussy. I find he is an incredibly interesting and unconventional performer, someone who goes very deeply into the music he performs, and someone who has a view, a very clear point of view on all aspects of the concerto, not just on his soloistic part. He often performs directing the orchestra from the piano, so he knows exactly what he wants to achieve from the players, not only from his instrument. And I'm looking forward to making music with him again, especially this Brahms, which I know he plays absolutely sublimely, but we never did the Brahms Concerto together yet, so this will be the first time with the first concerto by Brahms. We have played Brahms' second piano concerto with Leif Ove, with my London orchestra on tour in Germany, but we've never done the first one, so this will be the first time. Akiko Suvanai I've been following for a long time, and I respect her very much as a musician. Unfortunately, we don't know personally, we don't know each other personally yet. This will be the first time that we're working. Before we come to Japan, there is a concert in Berlin. She will perform with us, so technically the first collaboration with Akiko Suvanai will be in Berlin, and then we go to Japan. But again, what I admire about her is her unconventional approach to the repertoire. She also plays a lot of contemporary music. And I remember hearing Peter Oetver's first violin concerto, which was written for her, and she played it absolutely magnificently. After the Japanese tour, we return to Berlin, where we will finish our season. This season is entirely dedicated to the theme of nature. And it's not only the adoration of nature, which has been a theme of arts throughout the centuries, but it's also our engagement with the modern, very politically acute topic of the climate change, which the world is really worried about, and quite correctly worried. So we're hoping to raise awareness in our listeners about the necessity of respecting the nature and trying to save it. Although we realize that there is not much the classical music can do to improve this world, but I think even if a few people who come to our concerts stop polluting the air as a result of our proclamations, then we have achieved our aim. And we're also collaborating in these concerts with groups and companies which have made their objective the saving of the nature in Berlin, Germany, Europe, the entire world. After that, we have plans to go to an ESCU festival in Bucharest in the autumn, and this will include a performance of a very rarely performed masterpiece by George Enescu, Symphony Number 3. And also we will perform the semi-staged concert performance of the opera by Richard Strauss, Die Frau ohne Schatten, The Woman Without a Shadow. This year marks the 100th anniversary of this wonderful opera, and as you perhaps know, the orchestra has done a lot of opera in concert in the past under my predecessor, Maestro Janowski. Also such masterpieces by Strauss as Elektra and Daphne. But I think they will be playing Frau ohne Schatten for the first time. So I'm hugely looking forward to doing this piece with them. And of course we will continue performing in Berlin, and touring around the world. We have plans to go to United States of America, to China, and also to other European countries outside Germany. Well, I think all great orchestras of the past were predominantly opera orchestras, which also engaged in playing symphonic music, concert music. So I think you need a certain balance in the life of an orchestra, division between chamber music, symphonic music, and opera. Because opera is always a collaboration, and collaboration with not with other instruments but with other voices. And also opera is working on the text, so musical images are much more specifically and concretely embodied in the musical performance when led by the inspiration of the text. So I think there are direct benefits in learning a composer's operatic oeuvre, which will then bring dividends when you play his symphonic music. So for instance, with Richard Strauss, once you know his operas, you know exactly how to play pieces like Alpine Symphony or Heldenleben or Don Juan, because in his core he is an operatic composer, even in the symphonic music. The same applies to Mozart. Mozart's symphonic music, his symphonies, concertos, can be slightly enigmatic when it comes to the musical symbolism, but if you analyze his operas and see which keys, which tonal formulas, which melodies, which rhythms he is using for which characters in the opera, and which text it is representing, then you will also understand how to interpret the same musical images in the symphonic music. So I think the mutual benefits from playing symphonic and operatic music side by side are huge. I've only been once to Japan before, was in 2017 with my London orchestra. And Japan has always been a country of my dreams. My father traveled to Japan when I was little, and he brought back magical stories about this unique country. So I've always dreamed of going to Japan, and last year my dream came true. So I'm looking forward hugely to coming back to your wonderful country, and also to meeting the wonderful Japanese audiences, which are extremely attentive, polite, but also very warm in the reception after the concert.